regard, that's clear. This is some of the original work we done. We did, here's the cascade waterfall of a tree being affected by emotion. And here's a dramatic example. The tree's field effect became very coherent in response to this person's heart. And there was a plot here. Phase lock with emotion. Back. Yes, here we go. Here, this was done at the HeartMath Institute with my help. We had an ELF coil, and here's the low frequencies of the heart and the phase lock to this ELF coil under a tree. Notice that the space between harmonics in the tree has phase locked the space between harmonics in the heart. But the heart here in red has higher frequencies, and the tree loses it when it reaches the high frequencies. So the tree, for the most part, hears only the lowest frequencies of the heart. And so here we did the calculation to show the average ratio between contained harmonics of the earth versus the heart. And we show it was the cascade that the heart heard. So we're actually showing the mathematics to prove that the ability of a heart to link up with a tree is related to the geometry of the cascade. And it's that cascade here that creates the sweeping motion between frequencies which enables the heart and the tree to link. Now let's go back more to your question about the dolmen and the standing stones. The lady who did the work with labyrinths we're about to see when we talk about labyrinths is a lady named Marty Cain. MartyCain.com. And Marty had this experience in what she called the quoits, Q-U-O-I-T, in Wales and Ireland. The quoit. And this is a variation on standing stones. But the thing about the quoit is you have two stones like this and a lintel across them. And the charge density of the lintel across them is such that it creates kind of a spark gap. And she was literally laying on top of one day and noticed that half of her body had floated, literally floated up off the quoit. It's a true story from Marty Cain. Well, Marty is half Druid in her DNA. You can see it when you look at her. And so it makes total sense that she would have felt this. So what is happening capacitively that creates this effect on gravity? And that will lead us nicely to our conversation about geomancy and feng shui here. So let's just look at the picture of the labyrinth work here. The labyrinths are a way to steer charge and create this kind of capacitive field. So if we were to measure the charge density in the center of a labyrinth, the success of the labyrinth in creating sacred space would be picked up capacitively as charge density, exactly the same way that a sacred architect could prove to his client that he just finished building life force by assembling an effective biological capacitor called a house. Okay? So the ability to steer waves of charge into such a geometry that an infinite number of capacitive waves could converge at one space is the essential principle of fabricating sacred space. So the dolmen, for example, were ways to bend magnetism coherently to fabricate a dimpling point where sacred space could permit waves to agree. The wind of magnetism is not unlike the movement of a current of water. In the locality you're in, there will be a direction from which it's more compressing and a direction to it's more rarefying. So orienting the mouth of your labyrinth to be the catchment for a field effect depends in part on knowing the direction of the wind of magnetism. So let's just play some pictures here about what the labyrinth does. This is the sperm delivering capacitance to an egg called fertilization. And what happens, the delivery of charge density to the surface of the egg results in invagination. So the process of getting born is the process of, what happens is the egg receives a jolt of capacitance, And that creates a field effect which precipitates the membrane of the egg trying to accept the added spin. And the only way the spherical egg membrane can accept the added spin density is by invaginating or dimpling. And when that process of turning inside out goes to completion, the dimple becomes a tornado that goes through the egg, and it becomes a torus. At which point it learns the skill to turn inside out, at which the ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm switch places, and that's called getting born. Yeah. In other words, turning inside out is the first move you ever made. So that then leads, after the division that results, into the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 propagation geometry and the whole Fibonacci thing. So that turning inside outness made into a series of kinesthetic operations is basically what the labyrinth is. The labyrinth is a projection on flatland magnetically of the 7-color torus donut. So the ability to kinesthetically record, remember, and reenact the sequence of turns of mind. For example, if I look at the outside view of this gold spiral, I see the shadow of only the spiral. If I looked at just the gold spiral on the donut, I would see the Hebrew letter Beit, yes? But then if I walked 1/7 of the way from the outside, I should do this properly with the green. This is the proper orientation. The green is here. Red, converge. Blue, diverge. So if I go from 1/7 of the way here, from seeing the Hebrew letter B, and walk 1/7 of the way around, and again look straight at the center, I will now see the shadow of the Hebrew letter R, Resh. And so I keep doing that, but in the 7 turns, and when I'm done, I'm on the inside looking out instead of the outside looking in. And from there, that same gold spiral, from that point of view, is the Hebrew letter He. Pi, 5, squares the circle. And so now I've spelled the Hebrew word Bereshit, which was the first word of Genesis, which was originally mistranslated in the beginning. But when Fabre d'Olivet retranslated Genesis based only on the shape of the letters, he translated Bereshit to mean at first, in principle, the origin of thingness. And if you see, in fact, having enacted that sequence of symmetry operations to turn inside out on the surface of a donut, you had stored matter out of light, you tied the slip knot, and thus created thingness. So enacting the sequence of turns of mind necessary to turn inside out becomes enacting the sequence of turns of body to turn inside out on the surface of a donut. And that's why the shadow of the 7-color donut on flatland, on the wall of the cave, is the 7-circuit Cretan Minoan labyrinth. Yeah? The labial are nth. And the inside and the outside are in the symmetry relationship of a penis and a vagina. It's phallic, really, because it's instructions in dimpling. So what you do when you put this on the land properly, if you center it such that the center of the labyrinth is properly over the gnome dome. Everybody know what a gnome dome is? Ignominiously? A gnome dome is a name for the upwelling current of underground water. So when the underground water has a vertical upwelling component, it's sometimes called a water dome or a jed. That is a place where the magnetism, instead of going in strictly rotational inertia under your feet, has created an upward or a downward dimpling. And the upward versus downward dimpling of the underground magnetism sets the direction for the underground water coming up or down. And that dimpling versus up versus down determines the sex of your labyrinth. Yeah? Projective versus receptive. The underground water always occurs where magnetic lines cross in its vertical component. So if the magnetic lines don't cross, you won't have a vertical component of water underground. Also, the underground water always branches in an odd number of water veins from the water dome, looking like an umbrella. It'll never be an even number. And you can understand the physics because water follows magnetism, follows symmetry, follows awareness. And you will always find 1, 3, 5, 7 and never 2, 4, 6, 8 lines cross when you make the Platonic solids. So the odd